Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Tom, and I'm a member of Alanon. And glad to be here on a Saturday in February. There may be some folks who are new to Alanon, and I want to do a little explanation about the odd way we do things in Alanon, because we think it's pretty normal. But they don't get people with mental health to share at Alanon meetings. Instead, the rule is instead of having role models talk at an Alanon meeting, they have people to serve as warnings for others to serve. And so halfway through the meeting, you realize that though you may have trouble, you're not as bad or pathetic as the speaker, and you feel so much better about yourself. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's kind of a free-floating program, and you're going to find in Alanon all kinds of people of wide varieties of flavors and textures and hues and opinions. And if you don't agree with the speaker, neither one of you has to leave the program. You both get to stay. Alanon, when practiced, doesn't go around excommunicating people or throwing them out. I wish others learned from Alanon. People get pretty excited, but it's a principle of attraction rather than promotion. And I found that what attracted me to Alanon was there were some people in there who seemed to have real lives. And I started going to meetings. And this afternoon, I'm going to talk about some of my own stuff. And like I say, you are free to be horrified or feel superior to or judge. If you think I should be working a better program, tell my sponsor, not me. Because it doesn't help me to tell me that kind of stuff. I get worse when information like that is given to me. And my sponsor is here this afternoon, and that's always a thrill to see him not in jail, as I tell people. So, or treatment facilities chained to walls, you know, giving advice, but nevertheless there. I have a lot of alcoholism in my family, both my family of choice and my family of origin. There's a lot of alcoholic genes in the DNA, and half of the family are Irish Catholic Democrats, and the other half were Swedish Lutheran Republicans. And it got pretty tense on a wide variety of issues. People would have a couple of drinks and then discuss politics or religion, and it got real. We had resentments also. A lot of alcoholic families have those. The 1940s were kind of rough. Part of the family liked Mr. Roosevelt and part of the family didn't. And there was a barbecue Mother's Day weekend somewhere during the Second World War. And one of the Swedish Lutheran Republicans had a couple of beers and criticized Mr. Roosevelt. And my father, who had had a couple of beers, informed the relative that you do not criticize the President of the United States in wartime, which encouraged the other alcoholic to speak louder. And that was the last we saw of that whole branch of the family. They were just excommunicated. This was probably somewhere around 1942 or 1943. I'm born in 1947, and in 1965 we were having a family reunion for the first time since the Second World War. And this particular group of the family that was so critical of Mr. Roosevelt started showing up, and as they were coming up the driveway, and there were some cousins there and an uncle or aunt or two that I had never met, when I was 18, my mother turned to me and said, "Act like nothing happened." One of her roles was peacekeeper, peacekeeper, and denial really helps. And on each family had its own way of dealing with alcoholism. On the Swedish Lutheran side, we didn't call them alcoholics, we called them nervous people. And I have cousins who get so nervous, they get hospitalized, And the way it usually works, they're long-lived people. We just had a family funeral. One of my mother's sisters just died at the age of 99 and a half in her sleep, having had lunch and talked to some people, lay down and slept. So we had her funeral a couple of weeks ago, and this means everyone gathers. And we were very anxious about who shows up drunk, who shows up sober for things like this. And we were very surprised to find, we were so surprised that one of my cousins was sober, he's about 75, that everybody lined up just to smell his breath. But you can't tell him you're doing that, Instead, it's conversations behind, and then how are you? And gads. On the Irish Catholic side of the family, we didn't have nervous people, we had characters. And we would say things like, "Oh, isn't Sean becoming a character?" Which meant, distended liver and watch out. Don't let him drive. It was a great surprise to me to join the program and find out that some things that are embarrassing or scandalous or shocking can be talked about calmly at a meeting. That was a revelation to me, just a revelation. I hear a lot about alcoholism and have had lots of contacts with it. I mentioned my family of choice. As you may know, I'm a member of the Jesuit community and in the ministry in the Roman Catholic Church, and we're just thick with alcoholics and thick with adult children of alcoholics. And if that isn't addressed and talked about, some really awful decisions get made pretty regularly. And so I find that the Alanon program is crucial for me on a pretty daily basis, and I'll explain a little bit of that and describe some of that. But without the Alanon program, my life would be seriously different right now, I assure you. I was at a meeting a while ago, and this person was talking about alcoholism and said that alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. This is vital information. It really is, because the alcoholic isn't always aware of that, and the alcoholic thinks that he or she is just having a good time and the gorilla's cute. And as the evening goes on, they find out that the gorilla's grip is a death grip, and it's a little difficult to get away. And a lot of alcoholics and addicts are killed by the gorilla, and it's just brutal. And if you've seen this happen a couple of times, and you are an observer of the scene, you know the story, and it doesn't end happy. A lot of us who need 100,000 Alanon meetings in a row just to break even notice people we love dancing with gorillas, and what we want to do is get in the cage and separate the gorilla from the alcoholic. And we get our arms and legs yanked off and wonder what went wrong. A lot of the Alanon program, to my current understanding, is the awareness that the worst thing I can do is get in the cage. And so I get to watch but I'm not in the cage, you know? And feelings come up. I get angry, and I get sad, and I get despondent, and I get moody, and I want to rescue, and I feel abandoned, and I feel lost, and I want to scream warnings, none of which work. And I have to learn how to feel and talk about these things with other people who also have inclinations to run into the cage and rescue. And this is hard stuff. It's real hard stuff. I also heard, and this is, so I like the gorilla image a lot. I used to say that growing up in my family, alcoholism was a lot like having a rhinoceros in the living room. You all knew it was there, but you also knew not to talk about it, because if you talked about it, you're the one that had to take it out. So we just learn how to live with the rhinoceros, and everything was fine. You turn the TV up a little louder and maybe put tablecloths over the rhinoceros and decorate them during the holiday season, but don't get involved. And in my house, the rhinoceros slept a lot, and that made it easier. Every so often, the rhinoceros would wake up and run around the house in very threatening ways, and we would all jump up against the wall, preferably in the form of the cross, and wait for the rhinoceros to stop moving. And when the rhinoceros settled down, my mom would say things like, "Act like nothing happened." Act like nothing happened. Her favorite phrase. So rhinoceroses, gorillas. One other metaphor that I would like to use, I heard this 2 weeks ago, and this metaphor has an opportunity for insulting everybody, so I really would like to share it with you at this intimate Alanon gathering. One of my friends said that, being associated with an alcoholic, from having them, in the family or dating them, however you do it, it's a lot like wrestling with a greased pig. They're hard to catch, but when you get them, you hold on real tight, and they bite you, and they kick you, and they pee on you, and they force you into the ground, and you're covered with dirt, and your hair's yanked out, and you smell like pig shit. It's just awful, and then they get away. He said, we all know that story, but the key is the pig loves it. Some of my Alanon program is, stay out of the cage, don't wrestle with the pig. This is real important for my sanity. And I'm surrounded by opportunities to dance with gorillas and wrestle with greased pigs. And one day at a time, I don't want to do that. I'm just too cranky and tired to do that kind of thing. So, what brought me to Alanon? Well, I didn't know anything about Alanon for a long, long time. My first program was Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got into a treatment program in 1976, and I was introduced to AA and got sober 20 years ago. And then what I always wanted to do as within my religious community, a lot of us are teachers, and I was led into the classroom because I loved working with kids and I liked the teaching very, very much, and that's what brought me to Alanon. I had no boundaries, and I wanted to rescue every student on campus. I wanted to be very close to God, meaning I wanted God to speak through me. I wanted to be related closely to God like Henry Kissinger was to Richard Nixon, that kind of thing. And we would be very, very close, and I would pray to God, and God would take my advice and then do things for me. And I'm a helpful person. I really like helping left and right. But here's what happens to me. I try to help you. If you're an addict or an alcoholic, you smell people like me at 700 yards. And what you see is, sucker. That's what you say. Oh, there's a nice man who I can take advantage of. And I listen, and please call me anytime, and can I drive you anywhere, and can I loan you money? I mean, all that's part of my MO, let me tell you. And they say, yeah. And it's kind of like I've noticed in dealing with some people with addiction, and I won't mention names, but if you do a conference or a convention or a retreat or some kind of gathering, if you say, pay what you can afford, a lot of addicts and alcoholics here, it's free. You know? There is kind of a tendency on the side of one to take advantage of, and there is a kind of tendency on the side of the other to be taken advantage of. As one of the Alanon people say, the horns in the head of the alcoholic match the holes in the head of the Alanon. And it's a perfect connection. So what I would do regularly with my students is I would be available to them, and I would be understanding of them, and I would rescue them, and I would go out of my way to listen to them. And on Friday nights was football night. I taught down in LA for a long time. Football night, and this means kids drink and drive. Kids drink and drive a lot. They've been doing it for years, and they're going to keep on doing it for years. And I would hope, and this was my little pre-Alanon heart, oh, dear student, if you get into trouble, please call me. And then when I knew that I was needed, it was like a moth to the flame. Oh, I'm needed. I felt alive, I felt important, I felt powerful, and I would run down and rescue you, and then you would be grateful forever and change your awful behavior. Now, the only part of that doesn't work is the last part where they change their awful behavior. See, what they do is say, he's a patsy, let's do it again. And I would find I was being helpful and noble, and I was being sucked dry by people who didn't care about me. But I was easy, you know. Now, I'm helpful. I'm being taken advantage of. Even I start noticing it after a while. I get tired, I get exhausted, I get drained, and I get angry. What brought me to Alanon was the anger. And I'm a peace, love, and joy, Gene McCarthy for president, let's go door to door and smoke dope kind of guy, you know? One day, one of my students, he was a bright, perky little kid, 15 years old, you know, and kind of goofy, but bright. And I knew he was bright because he thought I was funny. And he would laugh at my jokes, and I really liked him. And it's really nice to have a couple of kids in the classroom who were kind of on the same wavelength, you know. Well, September, he was a sophomore, 15. September comes along, and he was bright and perky like a lot of those kids are. I mean, full of, you know, energy and stuff. And probably October, November, December, he's smoking dope and drinking, and he becomes a different kid real fast. And within a short amount of time, instead of participating in the class, he was observing and pretty withdrawn, and he would wear dark glasses and put his head on the desk and be asleep a lot. Now, this was not the first kid that happened with, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back. One day he comes into class, and I don't know if he was stoned or not. I mean, I have no idea. I can't tell today if anyone's stoned or not. I'm so self-obsessed. I don't know what you're doing, you know? If you have poured brandy all over your head, I might notice, but otherwise, and if it were on fire, I might notice, but don't count on it. Anyway, he comes into class, and I am angry. I'm real angry, and I probably had been angry for several days, didn't even know it. A lot of times, I don't know I'm angry. This has gotten better. But I don't know I'm angry. All I know is I'm right. And I'm not feeling, I don't throw, I don't yell, I just judge. I'm right. You're wrong. You must pay. And this isn't anger, this is justice, you know? I always liken the French Revolution, I taught history, I always liken the French Revolution when they cut the heads off the bad people. There is something about the sound of a falling axe that makes me sleep like a baby. I can't tell you. I just like it. This kid comes into class, and I'm pretty wigged out, and I lose control. I lose control of my pent-up emotions, my repressed emotions. I grab him, and I shake him, and I scream to him, and my voice carries, that he walks like a junkie, he talks like a junkie, he stinks like a junkie, and I shove him into his chair and start class. Now, at that moment, I have an out-of-the-body experience, which you can talk about in California without a lot of explanations. There are other places you have to show graphs and, quote books and say, no, it happens, but we know, we all know. And this was the experience. It's like I left my body, and I went up to the corner of the room, and I looked down on the room, and what I saw was a room full of terrified 15-year-olds. And I saw a 35-year-old man who was a lunatic. And the question that came across the bottom of the screen was, Tom, if you were 15 and in trouble, would you come and talk to you? And what I realized was my self-righteous anger had made me totally useless as a teacher. All I could do is be one of the people who would stand with the sign and scream, So I knew I had to do something, and I had no idea what I had to do. I continued going to meetings in the other program a lot, but this issue isn't really talked about very much there. And I went on a retreat with a group of people. It was an AA and Alanon members on retreat together, and they had a joint meeting together, kind of a generic 12-step meeting. And the AAs that Saturday night allowed the Alanons to talk. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As someone, and I'm not sure who the speaker is, but it was what said, we're very grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous has shared with us the 12 steps freely, having so freely shared with us their disease. So it's nice. Now, I attended the meeting in and out because I'm so busy with so much to do. But I heard a male member of Alanon, his wife was the alcoholic, talk about the need he had for Alanon, and his problem was this. With Alanon, I have learned how to live with a crazy person without going crazy myself. No, I'd never heard... Here's some stuff. I'm sure I have heard women say that before, but I never paid attention to them. This will surprise you, but some males don't listen to women. And one of the things, one of the things that Alanon has helped me with is pay attention to people who speak, not just because of their gender, and I'm real grateful for that. But I'm still able to not listen to people real easily because I'm so busy in here. And this man, when he talked, I was able to hear him. And I knew I had to do something with Alanon, and I made a resolution to start getting to Alanon meetings. And in Los Angeles, where I was living, there are about 97 billion Alanon meetings. And where do you go? Well, there was a local one, and it was a Tuesday night group. I lived in downtown LA, and I opened the meeting directory and found this meeting and went to it. And here's how that meeting worked. There was a woman there. Mostly it was women. There were a couple of men who sat in the back, but mostly it was women. And one woman there ran the meeting, and I think she had been secretary for about 204 years. What was in her favor was that she was full of common sense. That was really in her favor. But they would read the literature, I think, and then people would come with problems, and they would hand her their problems, and she would solve them for him. It was kind of like having Miss Manners running the meeting. Now, the benefit, the plus thing was this woman was full of common sense, and she helped a lot of people. However, that's not Alanon. That's called a cult. she ran Alanon the way the Communist Party runs North Korea, and it's not a good idea. But that was my first. I found her interesting, but I didn't relax for 2 seconds in the meeting. I'm a little nervous around groups like that. So that was a Tuesday night experience. Saturday night, I went to another meeting that actually was an Alanon meeting, where people from a variety of backgrounds gathered and shared their experience, strength, and hope, and no one tried to run anyone else's life. And they talked experience and focused on recovery, and they talked about detaching, and they talked about getting well, and they talked about service. And that's the meeting that became my home group for the next 2 years, and I learned a lot about Alanon. Then, however, life changed, and I left Los Angeles and I moved up to Oakland, California. Now, what do we know is God's will for us? Well, I never know. I have mixed emotions around people who have clear ideas about what God's will is for large groups. But I was teaching, and by the way Alanon started working very practically in my classroom stuff was I started lightening up a lot with my students. And I realized I was not in control of their life. What I had to do was prepare the material to the best of my ability. And then they have to learn it. And I also learned how to do things like spending time with people, listening to people, doing a lot of lightening up, doing a lot of making myself available without trying to run their lives. And they needed me, you know. A lot of Alanon for me is my keeping my big, fat mouth shut. Because if I just met you, I'm an expert. So anyway, I'd been teaching there for 5 years or 4 years or something, and I got an offer to get a different job up in the Bay Area. And it was going to be doing social work. I had never heard of this opportunity, but a letter came to me, and I didn't know what it meant. My superior in my community wrote this letter and said, there's a job opening in Oakland with social work stuff. We thought you might be interested. Give me a call. And my first response was to take the letter and run down the hall screaming that these people were trying to ruin my life. And I did that for about, 24 to 48 hours. And then I finally called them and said, I got this letter, what's it mean? Having worked through some of the early feelings. And they said, well, we thought this is the kind of work that you're interested in, and we thought you might be good at it, and so we thought you might be interested. And I said, do I have to do this job? And they said, oh, no, of course not. But you might be interested. Now, that took the wind out of my sails, because I would have preferred that I had been forced into it. Because then if it blew up, I could blame them. Do you understand the logic? But what they said is, you're a grown-up, here's a choice. So I called my sponsor. What good are they? Is a good topic, but that's not today's topic. And I called my sponsor and I said, there's this job opening and I don't know how to think about this. Now, this is one of my regular problems. Things emerge and I simply don't know how to think about them. I react rather than act. You know, I respond, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to think about this. And so he said something silly like, well, write down pros and cons for staying and pros and cons for the new job, and let's meet at Denny's. So I did that. I wrote down pros and cons for staying, and the classroom was getting a little stifling. I mean, I find that one of the things that's true about me, and it's a plus and a minus, I really like give me land, lots of land with the starry skies above. I mean, I really like that, and sometimes that helps, and sometimes that doesn't, but that's another topic. So I showed him the pluses and minuses and the pluses and minuses, and he just kind of skimmed it. And I said, so what do you think I should do? And he said, well, for the last 4 years, you've shown that you could be in a highly structured environment, bells ringing all day long, go here, go there, do this, do that, and stay in recovery. And he said, your new job at social work, West Oakland, has no structure at all. And you're going to be on the street a lot and doing a lot of things and meeting pretty exotic people. And the question The question is to see if you can stay in recovery in those circumstances. And I said, yeah, but what should I do? And he said, you could do either one. It can only be a terrible mistake. Now, I hate that. See, I want to have the kind of program where there are no horrible mistakes. I just want nothing but applause and a lot of feelings of gratitude and feeling my life is moving forward. But stuff blows up all the time. And I said, well, what if it's a mistake? He said, there's a step that talks about that. You promptly admit it, and then you go do something else. And I decided to take the new job. I left what I knew and I moved back to the Bay Area, and I got a job as a director of a group of people who were doing pretty intense social work. I had an administrator's job. I hope I never have to do that again. But for 3 years, I had the job of being the administrator, the hirer, the firer, and the fundraiser of a little social action group there. And I learned things in those 3 years that I never wanted to know. And I worked with people who were intensely difficult, and I found I had to go into a whole new level of Alanon recovery. I had a bit of a different focus. It was no longer my students, it was people I was working with, and the stuff we dealt with regularly was things blowing up and bursting into flames. You know, what do we do in crisis now? Some of you might identify with this. Some of us like danger. It gives us the adrenaline rush. Some of us like dating axe murderers, you know? One of my friends in Seattle, Mary, she's convinced that she has dated most serial killers who've appeared on TV. There's something about living close to the edge, and I identify with it. I mean, where I taught school was in downtown LA where the riots were. I worked in a parish for a while that was a total lunatic asylum, and I really liked it. You never knew what was going to happen next, and for years I went to sleep to the sound of helicopters and gunshots going off, and I liked that. I remember taking a break and going to Santa Barbara once for a couple of days, and it was so quiet I couldn't sleep until I think a car backfired. I went, oh, thank God, and I got to sleep again. Now this is my problem, it's not theirs. My problem is when I'm always on overload and always looking for crises and always needing adrenaline, the level of exhaustion that settles in is real deep. So one of my big Alanon issues is anger. And another big Alanon issue is the attraction to the dangerous and exhaustion. And I find regularly I have to be working on this. I still don't know when I'm doing too much. I mean, I have no idea. It seems perfectly normal to me to be in 6 places at the same time. And if I'm not there, who will, you know? And learning the things like saying no, or you can't. I got a call once from a fella, we had coffee once, and I don't know if I was his sponsor or not, but some people think having coffee makes you their sponsor, you know, but he got arrested. I live in Oakland. He was arrested in Santa Cruz for the sale and possession of cocaine, and it was 11 o'clock. This was after we had coffee. So it was about 11:30 at night, and I was his one phone call, and he said, listen, I'm in jail, and the bail set at $12 billion, and if you could please bring that in 20s, they'd really like it. And everything in me wanted to do it. Everything in me. This was, the 7th Cavalry, charging into the Little Bighorn one more time. Maybe this time it'll work. And he said, if you don't have the money, if you bring the mortgage to the house, they can negotiate that. He had thought this through. Remember the pig I talked to just a few minutes? Well, anyway, I said, give me your phone number. I don't know how to think about this. It's 11:30. If I get in the car now and do this, I could be there by 3, and I can get, I don't need sleep. I'm fine. And I called a couple of people. This is a great Alanon tool. Call a couple of people who aren't as involved. And I said, well, here's the situation and so forth, and what do you think? And they said, "What's he in jail for?" And I said, "The sale and possession of cocaine." They said, "Tom, he belongs in jail." This is why we pay taxes. And this is early in my Alanon stuff, first 5 years of Alanon. I called him back. I remember, in fact, the physical feelings back. I felt cold and clammy doing this. I called him back and I told him that I could not help him and that he had better contact a lawyer, and I didn't know any who lived in Santa Cruz. But he had stuff to do. See, I love running interference for people. I don't want people to know that their actions have consequences. I want to fix them. And I told him that I couldn't help him, and no the money and no to the bail, and I wished him well, and I'd put his name in my God box. I didn't tell him that, but I knew I'd do that. And I hung up, and he had that he kind of said, "Oh, okay." He was going to go down the list. You know, he'd find someone who'd run to him grateful to help. And I hung up the phone and went to the bathroom and threw up. And it was so visceral. I so much want to help, especially when it won't help. You know, especially when it won't help. I know that so many people who are addicts and alcoholics are killed with kindness, and I am one of those people who instinctively want to be involved in that stuff. I'm in Alanon for a while. I mentioned I was there for my students, I was there for my job, and then the family stuff started coming up. You know, and this felt awful. How are you feeling? Awful. One of the women in the East Bay says that when you get into recovery, you start feeling better, you feel everything better. And there sure are a variety of feelings I didn't know very much about. It was time for me to go back into therapy anyway, and I saw a real good shrink in Berkeley. I literally laid on the couch twice a week for 2 years or something. I'm fine. She ran the methadone clinic in Berkeley, and I thought she could handle me. And I remember talking to her, and it was time to discuss family, and I remember talking to her about a lot of things. And our first interview, the 50-minute hour, and I said, "Oh, this happened, and my alcohol thing, and my drug thing, and now I'm an Alanon, I'm a teacher, and I'm a priest, and this is going on, and that's going on, and so forth, and mom and dad and stuff." And at 48 minutes into the hour, I was done, and I said, "Do you have any questions?" And she said, "Just one. Are you always this charming?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Charm. It's very alcoholic. You don't have to do that here. See you next week." Terrifying. Terrifying. So I spent some time, and the dad stuff started coming up. My dad was the primary alcoholic in my life forever. And I was sober myself 7 or 8 years, I guess, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. And the first time lying on the couch that I mentioned that he was an alcoholic, I didn't feel liberated and free and happy. I wanted to go throw up again. And it was big stuff. The alcoholic pattern for the males in my family is to be very responsible, to be involved in church and school and civic life. We're very involved people. And you're busy, 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 and you come home and drink and pass out. So that has been our pattern forever. And so my dad, what I remember about my father a lot is him being asleep, passed out. And we were abandoned, but he never left home. This is very confusing. And I had to start working through a lot of that stuff. And I found by doing some inventories and doing some service, I spent a couple of years so angry I could have virtually nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with them. I was so angry. However, that's my stuff, not theirs. So I tried to, I have learned polite and I've learned courteous, but I'm not always good at that. And I went through a period when I think I was a genuinely unpleasant person to be with. And there were a huge amount of angry things that I had to talk about and work about and do stuff with. And that was very uncomfortable. My inner feelings were that inside I was all brittle and jagged and sharp. And Over time, it has softened. One of the things I used to do a lot with my mom, you wouldn't believe her politics. Large family gatherings, she would say something so stupid that people should fall out of their chairs. And she would say something, and it was up to me to correct her. Don't you know that? And I had statistics and figures, and I even would bring articles knowing she'd say something stupid, and this didn't help anybody. This didn't help anybody. And after I'd been going to Alanon for some time, at one family gathering, she said something that was just profoundly reactionary. And I knew it, and I knew I could say something about it, and I did not react. I made the choice to keep my big, fat mouth shut. And I find that when I do that, we get along better. Startling to me. My oldest brother agrees with her on a lot of things, and once, I guess it was after another election, and I forget whose side won, it makes no difference, but we were very calm, and he just said, "So, did we cancel each other's vote out again?" And I said, "Probably." And we didn't get deeper into the controversy. It was calmer. So I found that if I started changing my own behavior, things started getting better. Lots of letting go. I sponsor some people too in the other program, and I'm surrounded by alcoholics. And I learned that my sponsor sponsors me using a lot of Alanon. One of the things being, as I've alluded to before, actions have consequences, and a good sponsor does not interfere in that. If you're in pain, you have a right to feel your pain. And if you've made mistakes, you have a right to live with the consequences of your mistakes. This is very difficult. I don't want anybody to ever hurt. But I remember calling my sponsor on a couple of times, and I was bleeding and on fire. And I would say, "I'm bleeding and on fire." And he said, "Yes." Once he told me, "You've been trying to get to this point for a long time. Don't put a Band-Aid on this one." He said, "Tom, you're a mess. Be a mess. Go to meetings. Talk about it. Let healing happen little bit by little bit by little bit. Take the measures you need, and there's lots of tools, but go ahead. Let me honor your being a mess." Instead of, "What will people think if they see you to be such a horse's ass?" One time I talked with him, and I think I was a little worked up on something, and I referred to assholes. I know that's not a word we use in polite society, but talking to my sponsor, I've used that word. And he listens. He's an introvert. They listen. And I use the word asshole a lot in my conversation. And he said, I was done. I vented. I was done. He said, "Well, if in the course of a day you bump into an asshole, you bumped into an asshole." He said, "They're out there. Don't take it personally. You just do it. That's part of the luck of the draw. If in the course of a day you bump into 3 or more assholes, you're the asshole." And I wondered why he was telling that to me. I have such good spirit. So it's sometimes, what I found by that is sometimes the most loving thing that I can do for someone I love is to let them ache. Maybe be present, in different ways, but to let them ache. Instead of saying, "Oh no, I'm cold, you wear a sweater." No. You get to ache. There's a lot has gone on this past year in my life. Life happens, And my father died this summer, and he was 91, and he had cancer, and he's been frail over the last couple of years, and we've never talked much. He's not chatty, and so I didn't try to pretend that we have had this huge conversation for the last 45 or 50 years. We don't say much to each other. But he went into the hospital, and it was clear that he was pretty terminal, and we didn't talk about this very much. Are you surprised we didn't talk about this very much? But we talked to each other and decided, no extraordinary measures. No extraordinary measures. And he was full of cancer, and it was time to let him go. And so when he went into the hospital for the last month, because of Alanon, I had the spiritual and emotional freedom to be there. Now, I went in, and for the first couple of days, I didn't know what to do. I felt awkward and stupid, and nothing made sense, and I didn't know how to do because he was my father, and that does trigger stuff. And finally, and I would say, it's grace or insight or a brain, fiber suddenly vibrating. Someone said to me, instead of treating him like your father, because we've never done that smoothly, we've never done that dance smoothly, why don't you treat him like an old sick guy who's dying? And I've done that with all kinds of people for years. And suddenly, I could be with him. I could touch him, I could hold his hands, I could massage his feet. And I got the job of spending the nights with him. And this was wonderful. I'm not afraid of dying people, unless it's my dad, but he's an old dying guy. I got to sleep there at night. I got to feed him breakfast in the morning. I got to do some cleanup. I got to show some respect. I got to pray a little bit with him. It was a very good thing for my insides. The day he was diagnosed as terminal in the hospital, lunch arrived. And, they soup and, mashed potatoes and ice cream. And he wanted to eat the ice cream first. And my mom was there, and she said, "You can't do that." Soup first, then ice cream. And everything inside of me exploded. And I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, "He's just been declared terminal. Let him have the ice cream." But I've learned to keep my big, fat mouth shut. And I said, I'm going to go out and walk in the hall for a little bit. And I left the room, walked back and forth, and it took me about 10 minutes to get peaceful around this and realize they worked this deal out 60 years ago. And then I could let go of it, and I could be there. And he died end of June, and I was able to preside at the funeral and show some respect and some love for a good man who had a disease. And I'm just real grateful and the family, we got together. There's a number of us now who go to different kinds of meetings, and it really helps. It really helps. I'm grateful to Alanon for my life, for the quality of my life. I simply don't know how to do this otherwise. In Alanon, I've learned a lot about saying no. I'm not good at that yet, but I've learned about it. I've learned how to watch the hungry and the angry and the lonely and the tired. I've learned how to do my turn, your turn. I've learned how to talk about detachment, and I've had to learn that I'm my own worst enemy regularly. Regularly. 2 things on steps, and then I'm done. I think step 1 is not a hard step for me to take, because I've always been a little bit inclined to depression and feeling doomed. I think that's a little genetic in my case, but the sun's burning out, what's the use? This is... When I was in college, I read a lot. I still read a lot, but I liked reading Albert Camus, the French depressed existentialist. And one of his stories is about the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus made the gods angry, and his punishment was to have this huge boulder and roll it up a hill or a mountain, and he's supposed to roll it over the top, but just before it gets to the top, it rolls back to the bottom, and you have to start over again, and frustrating, doomed, eternal, it never gets better, keep pushing that rock. And I identified a lot with that. Life is frustrating and hard. There's another fellow named Franz Kafka, Hungarian, Jewish, 1930s, there's tension, And Kafka wrote a lot of interesting things, but one of his lines was the line, he said, "There is infinite hope, but not for us." Okay. Now this is me before Alanon. It's step 1. Doomed, no way out. It'll get better for you because I'm an optimist, but it won't get better for me because I'm a realist. I'm just cut off. And what happened over time was I discovered hope. I discovered hope, and it almost burst forth like a daffodil, you know, in the middle of the winter. It's up, and it was real small for a long time, and it gets real small regularly. But I find I think, to my understanding, step number 2 is all about hope. It's all about release. It's all about a way out. And I don't think the second step is real theological. I think it simply says there's a way out, that being restored to sanity stuff. So my question was, how do you get from 1 to 2? How do you get from no hope to hope? And I hear people, and this is a different point of view, and you can sure disagree with me, but what they basically say is you get to the second step by working it. You work the program, which to my mind makes the program into a kind of spiritual Gold's Gym. Working it, working it, working it, I'm doing fine. And my reality is, if I could have helped myself, I never would have had to meet you people. I didn't, the way I got to any place of hope was I did footwork. I mean, I went to meetings, and I did return phone calls, and I, you know, read literature, and that was the footwork. But what happened was, I didn't walk from step 1 to step 2. I didn't crawl from step 1 to step 2. I got carried to step 2. By the higher power working through you. I mean, where else do I make the connection with the sacred but at women and men who are making this recovery from this intense craziness of pre-Alanon and no hope and huge amounts of obligations. And I found if I can surround myself with women and men who have hope, I get infected with hope. You know? So I don't think the program works if you work it. I think the program works if we let it. And I try to let it when I go to meetings and do stuff and return phone calls to cranky, whiny sponsees. And call my own sponsor just to see if, you know, he's in jail or chained up anywhere, howling like a dog at the moon. I find the grace in the rooms works, and I'm brought to a place of hope, and I'm in that place a lot. So I would rewrite Kafka to "There is infinite hope even for us," you know? And it's in meetings that I find the experience and strength and hope to let me live the life of a human being. And for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.